Plato was an Athenian who lived from 427 to 347 BC. He came from an old aristocratic family. In his youth, he was engaged in poetry, but when he was 20, he got to know Socrates, who made such a strong impression on him that he abandoned poetry for philosophy. He stayed in his master's environment until his death in 399 BC, and retained his figure and thoughts in grateful memory until the end of his life. After the tragic breakup with Socrates, Plato traveled, and after returning to Athens, he founded a school in the grove of Akademus called the Academy. It existed for many centuries. There he taught, educated, and wrote his works. The Academy gathered many outstanding scientists, a perfect country. Throughout his life, Plato wondered about the best form of state. There were politicians in his family, and at home, as a child and teenager, he listened to conversations about politics. Then Socrates formed deep ethical beliefs in him. Plato wanted to create a perfect state, that is, one in which justice prevails. He was convinced that this would only be possible when philosophers took power in the state. He tried to influence the ruler of Syracuse, a large Greek city in Sicily, to become a philosopher. But this failed. Although political attempts to create a perfect state failed, Plato still thought about it. He wrote many dialogues on this topic, the most famous of which is entitled The State. It presents in detail the organization of such a state. It should consist of 3 layers of people. Firstly, philosophers, that is, people whose souls are dominated by reason. Secondly, soldiers, that is, people whose souls are dominated by will. And thirdly, farmers and craftsmen, whose souls are dominated by material needs. Philosophers should lead the state, soldiers should defend it, and farmers and craftsmen should produce the necessary food and items. Plato believed that such a state cannot change, because if it is perfect, it cannot be improved. We just need to be diligent to ensure that it does not get worse, and this is the task of philosophers, state managers. What really exists? The justification for the immutability of the perfect state is the theory of ideas created by Plato, that is, true reality, different from the one shown to us by our senses. Because the senses present us with a constantly changing world containing many similar objects, for example, many tables or cats. And Plato believed that there really are ideas, that is, inaccessible to the senses and unchanging patterns of all these objects. Ideas can only be known through thinking. However, they are not created and dependent on humans. This view is called objective idealism. They are eternal. They are related to sensible objects as originals are to copies, as shadow-casting objects are to shadows themselves. Plato contrasted the world available to human senses with another world, the ideal one, and claimed that it really exists and that sensual objects only exist. So there is, for example, one idea of a cat and many millions of cats that we see, touch, and whose meowing we can listen to. Individual cats pass away. They are born, develop, and die, and their pattern, the idea of a cat, persists beyond time. It is the same, according to Plato, with people and states. There is an idea of the state that the philosopher is supposed to know. According to her, he should lead the state if it is to be perfect. How do we know? Plato also wondered how a person learns and where he gets his knowledge from. He believed that true knowledge concerns ideas because truth must be unchanging, and only ideas are like that. Sensory objects are transient, so one cannot have knowledge about them, only opinions and assumptions. But how do we come to know ideas? Plato thought that human souls are connected to a specific body only for a certain time, and after its death, they are connected to another. When they are not in the body, they can see ideas, and when they reconnect with the body, they forget what they saw. Learning involves remembering what the soul saw when it was not in the human body. According to Plato, only certain souls can see ideas for a long enough time. These are the souls of philosophers who have the ease of learning. We recognize objects accessible to the senses because we have knowledge of exemplary ideas in our souls. Plato's writings, Plato's dialogues are beautiful. You can recognize the author's poetic soul from them. They are full of wonderful myths, metaphors, and stories, many of which became sources from which later philosophers, painters, and poets drew. The characters of the people talking are lifelike. The defense of Socrates, the Symposium, the Phaedo, and the Phaedrus are considered great literary works. A brilliant student, Plato's most famous student, was Aristotle, who stayed at the Academy for 20 years until the master's death.